go by trendy names, but have been around for forever. Fad kind of usually people think it's like spur of the moment, but a lot of these diets in one form or another have been around for quite some time. So we're going to dive into a couple of the popular ones today. So looking at kind of what is a diet, and we want to make the distinction here. There are two. There's diet in the what you eat on a regularly daily basis, and then there's diet in terms of the special kinds of foods that you eat either more or less of because you're trying to lose weight. So a lot of the times you will hear Scott and I very distinctly say your daily diet is important, the diet that you consume on a consistent basis. And we're not encouraging or pushing the other kind of diet, which is the special and limiting foods or something specifically designed for weight loss. So until there's a better term, until we come up with another word as an industry, I think we are encouraging and always promoting your daily diet, but today we're going to be talking about the second kind, the special foods and plans specifically for weight loss.
Yeah, and just on this was taken from the Collins dictionary. So they're just a couple of definitions to help with understanding what we're going to be talking about. Okay.
Found a couple of quotes that I want to make sure that we get to discuss. And as a company, and I can say both as for Scott and I, we don't promote, we don't encourage dieting per se. We want you guys to be healthy. We want you to fuel, to perform, to live a long and healthy life. So when we're looking at the diet industry in general, this quote, the diet industry is making a lot of money selling us fad diets, non-fat foods full of chemicals, gym memberships and pills. We lose a piece of our self-esteem every time we fail another one. Diets, the kind of reason that we see them is because people will start something, it's too restrictive, or it's unhealthy and it doesn't last. And so it promotes a very negative, not only self-image, but also image and perception of food. And that's not at all what we're about. The fad diets that many Americans are on are perfect if you want to be hungry and miserable all the time. Absolutely. In terms of a lot of these, you'll see every new author or influencer, and I'm using air quotes, Dr. Oz, I do not feel like he is a doctor, rely on your lack of knowledge and the science and our lack of science and weight management to sell their book. So anytime you see something, the blood type diet, whatever the newest, latest trend is, they are playing on your lack of knowledge and, unfortunately, our desire. They're a desire to lose weight and get healthy for all of the right reasons. They prey upon that and end up giving very bad information. So for this, what is a fad diet? We're talking about a diet popular for a time that often promises unreasonably fast weight loss or health improvements. All right, what do diets get right? And Scott and I will spend a little bit of time on this, but in general, anytime that you are choosing to change what you are eating, that's going to have an effect. It often involves caloric restriction. It often involves smaller portion sizes, restricted eating. It eliminates a lot of foods that potentially you were overdoing on. So diets in general, I'm not hating on diets specifically, they help manage caloric intake. They give you a specific amount of calories you're supposed to consume, a lot of them, and that helps people when it comes to weight loss. They can create a healthy relationship for food. A lot of times they teach us how much to eat, what the right portion sizes are. People miss out on that. They can encourage you to be eating more fruits, more vegetables, more fish, more whatever, and end up helping you realize that food may have been used not just to fuel your body, but for emotional reasons or for psychological reasons. It can boost motivation to make a change. It can help with body composition. Obviously, diets do get that right. And it can, by seeing the progress that you're making on a diet, that reinforcement can help continue and motivate you to keep making changes. And a lot of times when we see changes in our body, it encourages us to keep sticking with it. So there are components of diets that actually help and that are a good thing. We just need to be able to filter through the shit so that we can know what the right information is.
Yeah, and I think to this point, like if you look through this, what diets get right, it depends on the type of diet as well. And this is something that Elizabeth and I've talked about a lot is, if you look at creating a healthy relationship with food, if that diet is something like a Mediterranean diet or certainly what we're, pushing in within Fuelin, which is specific to an athletic, performance and improving health and performance in that aspect, it can create a healthy relationship. However, if that diet is something like the cabbage soup diet or potentially, we're talking about, the carnivore diet, which we'll talk about today, if that creates an unhealthy relationship with you, then that's obviously a negative thing as well. And same with, the boosting the motivation is, humans, we like new things, the promise of results. So that's where a diet can sometimes be beneficial to you because it is a change and it is new. As long as that diet is actually sustainable and good for you, then it can be a positive thing. Let's go.
What diets get wrong? And this is fairly consistent across, when I use the word trendy diets, whatever the new fad is, and something that is often promoted by people in social media or influencers with some kind of popularity or following. Severe caloric restriction. And that happens, which I will go into it towards the end, cleanses, detoxes, a lot. Scott and I have mentioned intermittent fasting. When that is taken too far, there are often off limits or no health foods, certain food groups, entire food groups that you cannot eat, or certain ingredients, or heck, even certain cuisines, regional types of foods, cultural types of foods that are completely off limits. A lot of them can cause health problems. And we'll see when we dive into some of these, everything from dehydration and constipation to severe vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Some of them, if you're not consuming certain foods, can lead to hair loss of your cycle. So there are a range of health issues. And I know, Scott, when we talk about carnivore, we'll go into that. Like eliminating fruits and vegetables can cause big problems. They promote unhealthy and unrealistic results. I know that you guys know this, but it's still, even with what I do, you hear that promise for some kind of, this will cure, insert whatever ailment you're suffering from here, and you're drawn to it. If any promise of something better, even if you know better, it's still going to kind of lure you in. So diets often promote lose 20 pounds by next Thursday before Thanksgiving. And it's like, that's not healthy or realistic. Most of them are not based on science. And if they are based on science, they have most likely and most often taken valid scientific information and skewed it to fit their narrative. And I know that you guys know this, but data is one of those things where it's wonderful and it can give us a lot of information, but if you know how to manipulate it, you can pretty much manipulate it any way that you want. And so a lot of bad diets do that, and they'll take a piece of a study and turn it into something, or an industry, and I'm not picking on the dairy industry, but they sponsor a lot of studies. The dairy industry will sponsor a study that shows that milk is, good for you in all these certain ways. Well, it makes them money. So they can take those components. Diets are also mentally defeating. It's very hard when you really want to make a change and you're not seeing the results, or you see the results and you're not feeling as good as you thought you were, or someone else is doing better on a diet, a particular diet, than you are. It's very hard. It's hard. It's why you see that yo-yo. It's why people try different diets throughout their life. It takes an emotional and psychological toll.
Yeah, and I thought this is a really good infographic from Asker Judenkrupp from his group. And I think what really highlights for me is that ultimately the diet works in terms of losing weight if you're in a caloric deficit. Simple as that. Okay. So whether it's a low carb, ketogenic, juice diet, raw food diet, whatever it is that you choose to be on, if it's going to get you to lose weight, it's because you're on a caloric deficit. That's why they work. That is physics. And that's really important for everyone to understand. So it doesn't matter what you're eating. Ultimately, if you want to lose weight, you just have to be in a caloric deficit. Now, that's not saying that the diet is good for you if it does create a caloric deficit, because ultimately it could be very unhealthy for you as well in terms of reinforcing either bad eating habits or unhealthy eating habits, reinforcing micro and so on. Because being on a juice diet is not something that you can do for the rest of your life. So yeah, but the main point being is every diet that is successful in losing weight is successful because it creates a caloric deficit. Just a really nice infographic, I think, for people to just get their heads around. Keto is obviously one of those diets that I think has raised its head in the endurance world time and time again. And we can talk about like low carb, high fat diets. And I think it's really important just to get a good understanding of the classical ketogenic diet and where it came from. So it was part of the Mayo Clinic and it was created a long time ago. So it's actually, 101 years old, which sort of is pretty crazy. But it was, this diet was created for epileptics. And that's where the efficacy of the diet was created. So, it was used for epileptics and also to prolong the lives of type 1 diabetics. And I think that's really important from the context of where the diet comes from. Now, it's not saying that the diet cannot have other applications, and certainly there are applications to endurance athletes and athletes in general, but it's important just to understand where it comes from. I think if we looked at it, that the ketogenic diet is that amplifies ketogenesis, okay? And it doesn't have to be strictly therapeutic ketogenesis or a strictly therapeutic ketogenic diet as described in like 1921. So I think the classical ketogenic diet was, as it says here, was around 1 gram per kilo body weight, which if you think about how much protein you guys are all eating, that's a very low protein consumption and wouldn't be very fitting for an athletic population. Carbohydrates originally was around 10 to 15 grams a day, and then the remainder was fat. Now that's very, very hard for anyone to do. I don't know if anyone's and that little protein and that little carbs, but that is a very, very tough diet to sort of stick to. Whereas nowadays it seems to be, and again, the definition of all of this is very loose, but generally 50 grams or less per day, which equates to, and again, percentages of total calories is not a good way of looking at it. So just look at strictly the total grams, but 50 grams or less of carbohydrates is technically regarded as, it's certainly a low carb, higher fat diet and could push you into ketogenesis. Protein, again, 15 to 20%, probably not a good marker because it depends on how much total calories you're taking in, but they haven't defined this in terms of grams per kilo body weight. I think you could certainly manipulate it so that you could take in 2 grams per kilo body weight of protein with around 50 grams of carbs, and then the remainder being fat out of the total diet, which would probably push you up into, potentially for some of the athletes who are consuming sort of, 2,500, 3,000 calories, somewhere around probably, 2 to 3 grams of fat per kilo body weight, which is quite a lot. So that's sort of where that comes from. Now, I think I will show you a chart in a minute that is a really nice summary of high fat, low carbohydrate, ketogenic diets and the adaptations it can do on the body. But I think like it's really important to understand that it can happen pretty quick. So 3 to 4 weeks is generally where some of this adaptation will start to occur, which, 3 or 4 weeks eating predominantly no carbs is probably still quite a long time, but you can get improvements in maximal fat oxidation within, say, 5 to 10 days. So within that 2-week period, you should see improvements in maximal fat oxidation. Now, again, is maximal fat oxidation good? And what is maximal fat oxidation? So this is the max rate at which you can utilize fat as a fuel source. So it's measured in grams per minute. So it might typically be at, say, less than 1 gram per minute. And when people go onto a ketogenic diet, it can be pushed up to something like 1.5, even up to 2 grams per minute. Now, that's really good. People say that's fantastic. You're becoming fat adapted. You're using your natural fuel sources to fuel submaximal exercise. Fantastic. But the flip side of this is that you're going to get a compromisation in terms of how carbohydrates are used at higher intensities. So this then comes down to what type of athlete are you and what are you trying to do? And maybe what time of year you're actually looking at doing this, because if your goal and your coach is getting you to do high intensity sessions and you're working on your higher thresholds and you're working towards that and racing at a good pace, then going on a ketogenic diet could be actually detrimental to your ability to utilize carbohydrates at that higher intensity. And I think that's a really big point for athletes to understand is if you're only ever going at submax or lower than submax, maybe ketogenic diet or high fat, low carb could be good for you. But I've spoken to on the Fuelin program is you all want to go fairly quick and you all want to actually, go as well as you can. So in that sense, going on a high fat, low carb diet probably doesn't make sense. But, there is something to, again, and if you look through the literature on this is that the difference in longitude, but the difference in just using a program of carbohydrates that are specific to the work being done is just as advantageous and can still show you improvements in metabolic flexibility, i.e. the ability to use fat as a fuel source or carbs as a fuel source, if it's done just around the work that's being done, i.e. Z1, Z2, giving you lower amounts of carbohydrates, higher amounts of fat. And then for the Z3 and above, or those higher intensity sessions, 65% above VO2, then fueling you with carbohydrates at those appropriate times will therefore not affect negatively that ability to use carbohydrates. So I think that is, really important for athletes to understand. The other thing is the ketogenic diet can impair the muscle's use of glycogen. So it becomes uneconomical. You start using more oxygen in order to fuel the same intensity of work. So in that sense, it can be not so beneficial. And the last point here is that it's not like you will hear, like any nutrition or any diet that you come across, is that you will hear miracle stories. People will do fantastic, and then you'll hear other stories where people won't do very well at all. So the response and the research is fairly equivocal at the moment, okay? It is not like this is going to cure you. This is not going to make you a superstar athlete. Some athletes tend to do well in it, some don't. And it's really up to, if you were going to go down the high fat, low carb route, then it's certainly something just to keep in mind. Where this paper's so the reference there is from Louise Burke, who's an Australian dietitian. She was head of the Australian sport. She's done a lot of sort of research, carb, low fat, and looking at it. I think she used to be very harsh on it. She's sort of come a little bit around the corner, and maybe there is a use for it. But I think this infographic is really nice in that what it's showing here is, with those, you will get a reduction in the early stages around your training capacity. So you probably will feel really shit in the first few days when you go high carb, high fat, low carb. You will get reductions in the ability to use carbohydrates. You won't necessarily get any particular changes in fat oxidation. As you move down, as I said, 5 to 10 days, you will start to see that improvement in fat oxidation, but you'll see a continued drop in carbohydrate oxidation and therefore an increase in oxygen usage. Across that period of time, you'll have a reduction in glycogen in the muscle, and that's going to have an impact on how you're probably feeling and performing. Again, move down 2 weeks. It's fairly standard. Around 2 weeks, you've still got those. And then coming down 3 to 6 weeks, you're going to get further rates of or improvements in rates of fat oxidation. So that can be advantageous, as I said, in submaximal exercise. But certainly if you are exercising at high intensity or trying to perform at your absolute best, you're probably going to suck. And that's just what it is. Now, again, there are going to be some individuals who feel amazing and do really well, but across the board, that is what we're seeing. Does anyone have any questions about that at this point in time? Nope. Okay. Okay, okay. We can ask questions at the end, and feel free to put some questions into the chat if you don't want to actually ask the question. Oops. Someone's phone. Cool. Okay, so we'll move on to what is known as the Carnivore Diet. Relatively new. I think as highlighted here, it was, it was brought up by Paul Saladino, who's a doctor, in 2020. So it is coming up to nearly 2 years old now. And the diet here being proposed is that this is what cavemen ate, and therefore it's going to make you really strong and really virulent and you know, be a caveman, I guess, and be a real man. I guess it doesn't talk about cave women in that sense, so it's probably a downer. It doesn't really give any sort of play to women or how it affects women as far as I'm aware. I think what's really interesting about the carnivore diet is that, you know, it does play on this whole evolution theory. One thing I will say about the evolution theory, and this is what I've always said about paleo, is that the average lifespan of a Neanderthal was like 25 to maybe 40 years of age. So I don't know if you really want to be following, and yes, there are other medical advancements in that, but it's not something that I really strive to do because otherwise I'd already be dead. Yeah, I just think that's a pretty funny sort of take on the whole thing. The premise of this as well is that plants contain dangerous components, and that is therefore detrimental to your overall health. I'm going to play a little movie in a minute that hopefully will work, and it's quite a funny take on this. And I'll see if I can get it up and working. Let me see if I can share it. How do I share that tab instead? So, okay. Oh, hold on. Please don't stop yet. You probably can't see that yet, can you? Okay.
Yet.
Can you see it? No. Okay,
No,
hold on.
not yet.
Hold on. Let me just see if I can. Where is it? Yeah. Okay. Can everyone see? Oh. Hold on.
So obviously the man wearing the kale is bullshit t-shirt is the founder of this lovely, I don't want to say founder.
Let him talk.
We can't hear it. It's not loud enough for us to hear, Scott.
Oh. You can't hear it?
No, it's super quiet.
Bugger. I can hear it really loud. Okay. Well, that didn't work. That was a massive fail. I will post the link. I'll post the link so you can see it afterwards. But it is a very funny take on what actually about it. Oh, hold on. Okay. Okay. You can see my screen still?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so that didn't work. That sucks. I'll share the link with you, but it's a very good take. Lane Norton's pretty aggressive with his sort of take on people. Hopefully he never comes down on me for saying anything stupid, but he absolutely rips Paul Saladino, a new one, as I would say in Australia, about how stupid he sounds when he's talking about how spinach can be detrimental to a baby's health, let alone an adult's health. So that's the premise of this diet. I think they also talk, the three main things is plants are dangerous. And I think on that, look, it doesn't, just because a plant is a plant doesn't mean it's healthy. But I think what they're saying is, components within, say, spinach, there is a form of cyanide within spinach, but it's a very different form of cyanide from what you would think of as being something dangerous to the human. And so he's linking it in terms of how B12 effectively is a component of cyanide. And if you eat too much of that, then it's going to be detrimental to your health. So it's pretty crazy how he sort of justifies plants are dangerous. In terms of fiber does not help constipation is another big one. And again, they have linked a study in the book, the Carnivore Code, which refers to, and I've seen the diet, this study before. It was where people were fed, I think they were Japanese, they were fed a very high fat diet and it improved their constipation symptoms. And that's sort of the premise for where fiber does not help constipation comes from. So it's sort of one research paper, which is always a concern, whereas there is a systematic review with a meta-analysis which is titled The Effect of Fiber Supplementation on Chronic Idiopathic Constipation in Adults, which actually very much supports the fact that fiber will help people with constipation. So going on that, I would probably take the systematic review with the meta-analysis as a good piece of evidence to say that fiber is beneficial to people who suffer from constipation, as opposed to a random study, which wasn't a randomized controlled study either. It was more an anecdotal review of some Japanese males who ate a high-fat diet and it helped their constipation, but that's just me. The other thing they talk about is LDL cholesterol is not dangerous. Look, there is lots of conflict in terms of LDL cholesterol and cholesterol and lipids and how it can affect you. But I think the overriding thing, if you do talk to a cardiologist, is that LDL cholesterol in high levels is linked to heart disease. Now, you could take it a step further. I mean, they talk about it's more about insulin sensitivity that's causing the problem. And there probably is a big part of that. And certainly the carnivore diet plays on metabolic syndrome and trying to stop, large spikes in insulin, or large spikes in glucose, blood glucose, and as a result, insulin spiking and then insulin sensitivity or resistance. But I think the big thing with something like LDL cholesterol is, if you go and get your ApoB checked, which is a lipid marker, and your LP(a), if those two are high, they're non-modifiable risk factors that you can get checked. If they are high and you've got high LDL cholesterol, I would certainly be recommending that you don't go on the carnivore diet, because you're probably putting yourself at very high risk. The other thing about the carnivore diet is obviously that it reduces total carbohydrate intake, which again, if you're an endurance athlete, if you want to do a high fat, low carb diet, as discussed before, it could be all right in that sense. But if you're in season and you're wanting to perform at your best, it's probably not going to make you feel that good. The other thing that they talk about, obviously, they talk about insulin sensitivity a lot, and spikes in insulin and spikes this substance called GLP-1, which they say is causing all the problems with metabolic resistance and that. But that GLP-1 hormone is actually a hormone that creates satiety or feelings of fullness. And if anyone's listened to the Huberman lab recently, you'll hear him talking about this GLP-1 hormone and how there's a modified version of this, which is actually one of the most effective weight loss drugs currently in use, and can cause somewhere between 15 and 20% body weight loss in individuals who use it. It's an injection. So again, the underlying mechanics of the carnivore diet, saying that things like GLP-1 raised as a result of insulin spikes, sort of doesn't make sense, because the reality is if there was a rise in GLP-1, then they should actually feel better and feel more full and so on. So I think the last point about the carnivore diet is that more research is required. I think everyone who is sort of aware of this diet agrees that, look, you're taking in more protein, you're reducing carbohydrates. They're all good things. But the removal of fiber and fruit and vegetables and all those good things that, again, Elizabeth's going to talk about in relation to the Mediterranean, I think it's a little bit of a cause for concern. It's not saying that it couldn't work, and you'll certainly hear really good anecdotal results. I can tell you now, a friend of mine has done the carnivore diet. He swears his back pain's gone. He's lifting heavier weights than he's ever done, blah, blah, blah. It does happen. People will always give you those anecdotal reports. But I think if you look through the research and you look through the data, the majority of the time, it's probably not going to be that good for you. But that's my take on the carnivore diet. Any questions?
I'm curious, has anyone tried the carnivore diet or found it appealing in any way? I mean, and I love a good steak, but and no judgment one way or the other. I would just love to hear. I haven't spoken to a lot of people that have tried it. I've got like 4 friends that have done it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the ketogenic diet, the high fat, low carb, and then you look at the carnivore, pretty similar. Yeah. Pretty similar. Carnivore diet's probably going to push you into ketosis as well. So, yeah.
Different take.
Cool. Let's keep going.
All right. Okay. So looking at the Mediterranean diet, and I wanted to specifically focus on this because if I'm going to recommend a specific diet, or if I'm looking at something that is heavily researched, has been studied in multiple cultures across multiple demographics of people, the Mediterranean diet is very studied and researched, and it does incorporate a lot of the foods and components that you'll hear Scott and I talk about. So originally, looking at the Mediterranean diet, and you'll hear Greek, Italian in that area, and obviously Spain. There are different cultural differences, but as a whole, the focus was on cardiovascular health and longevity, and the Mediterranean diet very much supports and benefits cardiovascular health and longevity. It is mostly a plant-based diet with fish and meat kind of playing those supporting character roles. You can eat fish, unsaturated fats, whole grains, fruits, veg, legume, nuts, seeds. They do kind of say no to or infrequent intake of red meat, no fried foods, obviously, white flour products. So it's very from the ground to plate, or the farm to plate, or the sea to plate kind of a diet. On all of the lists of most easily followed for the longest period of time, most researched, most beneficial, type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease, all of those, it tops the list on those. So it's very much, I think, as a diet per se, it's on the recommended side. When you're looking at it though, because it does, and this is with any kind of diet, when there are certain foods or entire food groups that are excluded, you can have vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So because this promotes the, nuts and seeds and olives and whatnot, it's very easy. Respondents and people on this diet will overconsume some of those because, who doesn't love a good jar of olives? They say, red wine, 1 glass per day is good for you. And a lot of us will take that to mean, well, if 1 glass is good, 2 to 3 is better. There's resveratrol in there, there's polyphenols. So it can be taken to extremes. Because it's less specific than carnivore, keto, some of the others, and doesn't list exact amounts of calories or any of the macronutrients. For those people that aren't necessarily sure how to create a caloric deficit, it doesn't give them any guidelines. So it's very easy to eat more than expected. And obviously if healthy fats are in there, very easy to go over in your daily caloric intake. Again, no red meat could possibly have you low in iron, calcium loss if you're not consuming a lot of dairy. So as with anything, and why we don't exclude particular groups of foods, or we say some in moderation, there's no perfect solution to eating, but the Mediterranean diet very much does promote and is healthy and does include a lot of those components that we talk about. And I think, I can't speak for Scott, but if I looked at my daily diet, it very much aligns with a lot of this. It's, fruit and veg, greens, that is kind of what is the base and bulk of every single meal. And then I build the proteins and carbohydrates around that. If you are looking at making changes for cholesterol or type 2 diabetes, by incorporating this style of eating, you will see those benefits. They've shown that it, can help with sleep and can potentially help prevent dementia and Alzheimer's. So the variety of food and the variety of healthy foods in here. And I actually like the lack of specific limitations, allowing you as an individual to make it fit within your lifestyle, I think is one of the biggest benefits. I feel very comfortable saying this is a great way to eat.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about the Mediterranean diet is I don't actually see it as a diet at all. It's like, when I look at it, I'm like, well, that was just what I grew up eating. Like,
yeah.
It was like fruit and vegetables, meat, fish, minimal processed foods. It's like, it's not really a diet per se. If you think about it that way, it's like, it's just sensible. One thing I would say about the Mediterranean diet, which I think is being flagged more and more now, because a lot of it is correlation between this food and then improved health status in those regions, is that I think the element of stress is now being very much linked to, if anyone's ever been to that area in the world, they don't do very much, though. They're pretty relaxed. And you're sort of like, wow, how does everyone live like this? And I'm sure whenever anyone goes to Greece or Italy and that, it's like super relaxed. So there is a lot of application in relation to levels of stress and how that is probably impacting their overall health, and things like heart disease and cancers and that as well, and dementia. So I think that's got to be layered in on top of this. And it's not just eating, good quality fish and meats and vegetables and fruits that is improving their overall health. I think that's a big play here. They certainly sleep a lot. There's minimal stress. So, I think those do need to be considered. And another point that Elizabeth just touched on there, and I'll put it up as a full post. I wrote an article just recently for Pillow Nutrition, which was about the link between nutrition and sleep. And the Mediterranean diet is actually one that keeps coming up, because most of the studies have looked at the impact of sleep on nutrition. And we know that if you've got poor sleep, it will push you towards probably poorer nutrition, poorer choices. So you'll tend to go for more fatty foods, sugary foods, to provide some sort of hedonistic sort of response and make you feel better. But if you look at the research looking at the impact of diet on sleep, so the reverse, because it is a bidirectional sort of relationship, is that the Mediterranean diet, those who eat somewhere between, they sort of have it as like 5 to 7 serves of veggies, fruit and veg. Those individuals will tend to sleep for the optimal period of time, so not less than 6 hours and not more than 9 hours in a day, but the quality of that sleep will also be better for those individuals. So whilst we're pushing fruit and veg a lot from a weight management perspective, from an improvement in micronutrients, from an improvement in feeling full because you're eating a lot, there is also and obviously fiber for gut health and things like that. There is also the added benefit, if you do struggle with sleep, that eating that 6/5 of veggies, those 6/5 of veggie fruits could also be beneficial in terms of how it impacts your sleep. And so I think that's really cool to see. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on. You sort of covered this. Do you want to? Yeah, we sort of covered that.
Yeah,
how it
I
works.
think just looking at some of the, and I know that it's a small print, so I'll try to include that maybe in a blog post writing about this, just showing some of the benefits from research that we see. And I think for athletes, very important, and why I am so, I guess, favorable towards a Mediterranean style of eating is because of the cardio protective effects of the foods that they include there. Obviously, our hearts are essential to doing what we want to do. And so anything that we can do to improve cardiovascular health, reduce your risk for morbidity and mortality, obviously these are things to do. So a lot of the foods that you see there, the unsaturated fats, the fish helping with lipid profile, the fruit and veg, eggs, let me see that, garlic, even looking at alcohol and how that potentially, and if you've listened to Huberman's podcast on alcohol, not as beneficial, but as Scott said, allured to it, stress reduction levels, if that one glass of wine can help with that, and then in turn that helps with better sleep and better stress management, overall potential benefits there. So the research behind the Mediterranean diet really does support that, the greater message that we're giving here of your health, long-term longevity is of key importance. And that's, what you want to do when you're looking at your meal plan for the week, when you're looking at making your food lists and developing healthy habits, incorporating these healthy foods because they protect your heart, because they protect your brain. This is why you want to be spending time making sure that you're including them on a daily basis.
And why you want to avoid the.
Oh gosh. Okay. If you know me, you know that I have very strong opinions about detoxes and cleanses. I just can't. I think they are so ridiculous. And I understand why people get attracted to this. It's very regimented. It's very specific. And because of the severe caloric restriction, people do see results. Now, are they weight loss results or are they water loss results? Probably a little bit of both. So detoxes and cleanses, it's this short-term intervention. Usually it starts with fasting. It's some kind of stop eating for a bit of time and then add in fruit and veg juices, water, some kind of magic water often, supplements, herbs, teas, enemas. The amount of stuff that they sell you to go along with a detox or a cleanse is just preposterous. It's like, you need, as if you need all of these things in order to, help you stop. I have no problem saying they are baseless, often dangerous, unclear, if they promise to do everything, fix everything, that quick fix mentality that I don't believe in and can be very detrimental emotionally, physically, mentally. A lot of the claims that you'll see, right? Fasting allows your organs to rest. huh? Like what, because I'm fasting, all of a sudden all my organs just start sleeping or something, or like they're, you know, that my heart's no longer pumping blood. I mean, it's ridiculous. Your organs don't need to rest. That's their job. They're very efficient at doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you're feeding yourself properly and getting the right vitamins and minerals and nutrients every day, your organs are cool. Stimulating the liver to get rid of toxins. Again, it's its job. You have one, it does it. Obviously, if you have liver and kidney issues, that's a whole different scenario, but still, you still don't want to be going and doing, you know, crazy detoxes. Improving circulation, get out and go for a walk. Just lowering inflammation, eat fruit and veg, exercise regularly, sleep well, you know, throw some turmeric and garlic in there. I mean, really, resetting your metabolism. Yeah, because your metabolism has some magic clock that, you know, all of a sudden, if you start fasting and drinking celery juice, Kourtney Kardashian, magically all of a sudden your metabolism will be like, oh, all this time I was doing the wrong thing, and now I get it. Thank you for starving me. It doesn't work. It doesn't. It's very hard. Obviously, there's a reason they say do this for 2 weeks, because they know no one wants to do it longer than 2 weeks. And I don't mind. Yeah. I'm not saying don't have a green juice as part of your healthy diet. I'm not saying, you know, that water isn't important, or coconut water isn't lovely and has some potassium in it. But to use that as your body's only way to heal itself or lose weight is just ridiculous. I think
and just on that, like, you know, back to that slide where I said, like, why do these diets work? It's because they push you into caloric deficit. Ultimately, if you're just having celery juice, of course you're going to lose weight because you're not eating anything. And it's like, but you're not going to be able to sustain that. And then probably because of that huge caloric deficit that you've created in the 1 to 2 weeks, you're probably going to be ravenous afterwards, and then overeat, and then probably put on that weight. And most of these detoxes, cleanse, fad diets, you will lose weight, but then generally you will put it on plus 20% after them. And that's a really important point to understand with crash dieting, is that often the reduction will then bounce back with a surplus. And that's why you get yo-yo dieting.
Thank you. Yes. So if you hear that there's, you know, some magic scientific evidence of how these cleanses are good, a very comprehensive study in 2015 that there was, and I put it in capital letters because the researchers said there's no evidence that the research shows that they work for long-term weight management or elimination of toxins. And I want to acknowledge, yes, we are finding out every day that there are microplastics in the water that we drink, and there are chemicals that we are getting because of the conditions that we live in industrialized societies. I'm not saying we don't have those. I'm not saying they're, you know, they found microplastics in breast milk now. So there are things to consider of environmental toxins that are a part of our daily diet that we can look to reduce or eliminate, and, you know, potentially make greater changes so that we don't have these unhealthy components as a part of our diet. And yes, our soil needs better minerals, and but a juice and a cleanse is not the way to do this. And I think what makes detoxes and cleanses so appealing, aside from the fact that it's this immediate structured, you know, we're triathletes or endurance athletes, we like a training plan, and a cleanse will give you that. It's one juice at this time, and, you know, cabbage soup at this time. So I see the appeal of that, but as Scott said, long-term, you're not going to be able to stick to it. It's quite miserable. I tried it once. I have tried the raw food diet and a plant-based diet and because I want to see what people are doing. And so I get how and why. And if you have a very unhealthy diet to begin with, a fruit and veg juice is going to feel good. Your body is going to have this, you know, like, wow, I'm actually getting some vitamins and minerals, and I'm not eating fried food or highly processed foods or foods that are high in trans fats. So there is that effect of feeling better. But if, as most of you on the Fuelin program already are, you're eating fairly balanced, very good diets. And so the effects of these we're just not going to see. sorry, I could go on and on and on, but I want to leave time for questions.
That's very good. That's very good. No, but I think your point there is very valid in that, you know, hopefully if you are generally eating very poorly, then something like a juice diet could feel incredibly healthy, because ultimately you're now actually getting some fruit into you, whereas maybe you didn't have any fruit before. Whereas I would hope that for the majority of the athletes on this program, they're now like, oh, I do eat a lot of fruit. I do eat a lot of vegetables. I do eat good quality proteins, whether it be animal or plant-based. And so then reverting to something like a celery juice diet would actually be counterintuitive and probably feel ultimately very unhealthy. So I would at least hope that. But anyway, look, I know we actually have finished on time. Does anyone have any questions? I know it's a bit of a general talk today. You know, I think it's good to cover things like this because questions do pop our group how to do it, and I think, you know, it's just good awareness. And I think anytime anyone sees anything like a new diet or anything, certainly flag it with us. They're always interesting to have a look at, and look at what potentially the research is for those types of diets. Look, I think in terms of the high carb, the high fat, low carb, I always call it high carb, high fat, low carb, it's probably the one that's of most interest to most endurance athletes. And as we've said, like if you, I mean, even on our program, if you're, you know, doing a lot of low intensity exercise, your total carbohydrate amount that we're going to give you is going to be lower. It's not going to be or less, because I just don't believe in that, and we're not going to do that. Yeah, if you're an individual athlete and you do want to try it, we can make it happen on the Fuelin athlete on the app if you want to give it a go. But it certainly wouldn't be something that we would advocate. And I just think for a majority of athletes, they feel worse on it. And I still believe you can make significant improvements to your metabolic efficiency just by programming the appropriate amounts of carbohydrates and the appropriate forms of carbohydrates for the intensity and the duration of those sessions, which is what we do on a daily basis anyway. Cool. Anyone got any questions? Come on. You must have some questions.
Diets, there's got to be. Or maybe there's one we didn't cover today that you've heard of, or you know, or maybe what's the most ridiculous one you've tried? I can say I did not enjoy the raw food diet at all. Missed cooked food.
So I have a question about metabolism. So in that juice cleanse slide, it said, you know, reset metabolism. And I know, Elizabeth, you mentioned to me that like yo-yo dieting can cause a low basal metabolic rate. And I'm wondering if there's any hope for raising that basal metabolic rate. Like, does strength training help raise that? Like, what do you do? Asking for a friend who has a low BMR. Yeah, like, so, and I don't think mine was necessarily from yo-yo dieting, but I've tried some of the crazy stuff. And so what do you do to fix that?
Yeah, well, in terms of strength training, look, an improvement in lean muscle mass will assist with increasing basal metabolic rate, not by a huge amount. I think it's also overstated how much of an increase it will. But you've got to remember that whilst it may not contribute totally to your resting metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate at that time, you also have the weights training will have significant impact on what we call EPOC, which is the energy burn after training. So with endurance training, it stops immediately as you stop. With weights training, you continue to get this sort of energy burn afterwards, which will play a role. If you've got more muscle, you can tend to be more active. So you have potentially the ability to do more as well. So whilst it may not necessarily increase significantly the basal metabolic rate, the other advantages of strength training will play into that to ultimately get you going. Genetically, some people just have low metabolic rates, which ultimately just means that you've potentially got to do more activity. So that's separate from exercise. Just being active, fidgeting, moving, standing up, standing desk, for instance, things like that are very important. Stairs, walking, all that sort of stuff, super important. And then your activity or your exercise levels may have to be a little bit higher as well. And then ultimately monitoring and being very conscious and cognizant of what goes into your body. And that's just the way it is. As much
Feels
as
like a
anything, I
rip-off.
think. Yeah, I think some people have it. The only other thing, like, I mean, obviously caffeine a little bit of resting metabolic rate. Stimulants, I mean, that's what ephedra was for, increasing metabolic rate. Green tea, matcha, some of those can help to bump some of that resting metabolic rate. So certainly things like that. What about you, A? Do you recommend anything else around that?
No. And I would say, and it's not a direct boosting of your metabolism, but kind of like we've touched on, eating enough consistently and over a longer period of time really does help your body become, like, I don't want to say become efficient, but it's when you're drastically under fueling as well that it's very hard on your body. So making sure that you're getting enough, I think does have an impact. And strength training, I'm going to second that till the day I die. Strength training for sure.
Thanks, Esma. Kath, one other thing. So in terms of protein has the highest thermic effect of any of the macronutrients as well. So a higher protein intake can increase the metabolic burn. There is some really interesting research, again, it's not a lot of research, but where you really push up the protein intake, as long as your kidneys are fine, but, you know, with 3-4 grams per kilo body weight, which is a lot. But people literally feel hot when they're doing that. A lot of it's anecdotal, but I think that's also been shown to increase resting metabolic rate. I'm not saying you should go and do that. One of the things with the body composition type nutrition program we're putting forward is there is a bump in the protein intake relative to what you're currently doing. So it is a little bit higher. So that could be something to play around with as well. We could bump your protein and see if that helps you feel, feel fuller, but also what that does in terms of impacting body composition and weight loss.
Cool, thanks.
Tell your friend that's a great question.
I saw Esteban put in about the blood type diet, and we've talked about this before, but the blood type diet has been, there was a review, I think it was a meta-analysis from University of Ottawa, I think it was somewhere in Canada, and they literally ripped it apart and just showed that there was absolutely no scientific research or evidence to support a blood type diet. And so that's specifically saying, like, if you are type O, you should eat these types of foods. And if you're type
he cut off.
actually getting your blood done and looking at specific, sorry.
No.
And then look, it's unstable, sorry. And then looking at specific markers within your blood. It's very different from the blood type diet. Cool. Okay.
I always found it funny that like nobody knew their blood type, or very few people even cared. And then the blood type diet came out and everyone's like, oh my gosh, like I want to start eating for my blood type. And it's like, you didn't even care what blood type you were 7 minutes ago. Now all of a sudden you're changing your entire eating. Anyway, diets, fun.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, look, it was good to see everyone on the call. And then I think next week, I'm trying to think what the one next week is. I think we might be talking about fasting. We're either going to have fasting or have Matt Herring, who didn't join last week, to come on and do that. And we'll look at doing that. Typically these fall on a Thursday, but next week, obviously you've got Thanksgiving in America. So we may look to do that either on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, depending on how everyone sort of feels about that.
And we're also looking at topics for 2023. So if there are things, a lot of you come to all of these webinars and we appreciate it. If you have topics you want us to discuss, things that maybe we touched on earlier, you want us to revisit, your voice and opinion matters. We would love to hear, and that's, you can, put them in the survey afterwards. You can fill it out. We hope you fill the survey out, but putting in some ideas for that there as well. Sending us emails, anything. We want to keep making these as informative, but also regarding what you guys want to hear and learn about. So
yeah, Nico, we've got that one coming up. Actually, we have done a couple of talks on nutrition whilst injured, and so yeah, we're going to do that one again, actually, because that was fairly well received, and we'll just update that. But that is a good one. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Yeah, please fill in the post session, and that's a good opportunity to put in any requests you've got for future sessions. If you can fill that questionnaire in at the end of this session when we end it, put in your suggestions, and we'll definitely get those out for next time. Awesome.
Yeah, and then I'm happy to stay on if there's any people that have questions about the app. I know, Tim, you're new, so welcome. I think I recognize most of the other names, but if anyone has any issues with the app, feel free to stay on. I'll stay on to address those. But thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.